The wind screamed through the Montana plains, tearing at the brittle pines like a beast with no name. It was 1887, and winter had sunk its teeth deep into the Bitterroot Valley. Snow fell in sheets, thick enough to choke the stars. A single lantern flickered on the porch of a weathered saloon, its light barely piercing the white haze inside. The air smelled of stale whiskey and wet leather. Men hunched over cards, their voices low, their eyes darting to the door every time the wind howled. But no one expected her. The door slammed open, and there she stood, a girl, no older than 17, her face half hidden under a tattered wool scarf. Her coat was too thin for the cold, patched with burlap, and her boots were caked with mud and ice. In her hand, she clutched a small tin box, its edges rusted, held shut with a leather cord. She didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there, letting the snow swirl in behind her. The room went quiet. Every eye fixed on her, not because she was beautiful, though her sharp cheekbones and fierce gray eyes held a kind of wild grace, but because she looked like she'd walked straight out of a ghost story. "Who the hell are you?" growled a man at the bar, his hand resting on the hilt of a knife. She didn't flinch. "I'm looking for Caleb Morrow," she said, her voice steady but rough, like it had been scraped raw by the wind. "I was told he's here." The barkeep, a weary man with a scar running from ear to jaw, leaned forward. "Morrow don't take kindly to strangers, especially not kids who look like they're running from something. You got a name?" She hesitated, her fingers tightening around the tin box. "Leela," she said finally. "Just Leela." The men exchanged glances. One laughed, a harsh sound that died in his throat when her eyes locked onto his. They weren't the eyes of a kid. They were the eyes of someone who'd seen too much and carried it anyway. "Morrow's in the back," the barkeep said, jerking his thumb toward a narrow hallway. "But I wouldn't go knocking if I were you. He's not in a talking mood." Leela didn't thank him. She didn't look back. She stepped forward, her boots leaving wet prints on the floorboards, and moved toward the hallway like she was walking to her own grave. The wind slammed the door shut behind her, and the saloon exhaled, the men returning to their cards. But the air felt heavier now, like the storm had brought something in with her, something that wouldn't leave easy. In the back room, Caleb Morrow sat alone, a half-empty bottle of rye on the table. He was a big man, broad-shouldered, with hands that looked like they could break stone. His hair was streaked with gray, his face carved with lines that told of years spent outrunning his own shadow. He was mending a leather strap, his fingers slow and deliberate, when the door creaked open. He didn't look up. "You've got the wrong room, kid," he said, his voice low, like gravel under a boot. "I don't," Leela replied. She stepped inside and set the tin box on the table with a soft clink. "This is for you." Seat trays, his eyes slow, wary. The box was small, unremarkable, but the way she held herself, shoulders squared, jaw tight, made it feel like a lit fuse. He leaned back, crossing his arms. "I don't know you, and I don't take gifts from strangers." "It's not a gift," she said. "It's a debt." She untied the leather cord and opened the box. Inside was a single locket, tarnished, silver, engraved with a faint outline of a hawk. "This belonged to your brother. He gave it to my mother before he died. Said you'd know what it meant." Caleb's face didn't change, but his hand froze mid-stitch. The air in the room seemed to thicken, the fire in the corner spitting like it felt the shift. "My brother's been dead 10 years, he said, voice colder now. "You're lying." "I'm not." Lila's voice didn't waver, but her fingers trembled as she pushed the locket toward him. "My mother's in trouble. She said you're the only one who can help. She said you owe her." Caleb stared at the locket, then at Leela. Her eyes were steady, but there was something behind them, fear, maybe, or something harder, like she'd already made peace with whatever came next. He stood, towering over her, and picked up the locket. It felt heavier than it should, like it carried more than metal. "Your mother got a name, Clara," Leela said. "Clara Wade." The name hit him like a bullet. He turned away, gripping the locket so tight his knuckles whitened. Clara, a name he hadn't heard in years, one he'd buried under whiskey and regret. He didn't ask how Leela knew. He didn't ask why Clara had sent her. He just pointed to a chair in the corner. "Sit," he said. "You're not sleeping in the snow." Leela didn't move. I don't take charity, she said, her voice sharp. I'll work for it. Whatever you need cleaning, cooking, mending. I'm not here to owe you. Caleb almost laughed, but there was no humor in it. You're Clara's kid. All right, he muttered. He nodded toward the fire. There's a broom in the corner. Start there. She didn't argue. She grabbed the broom and began sweeping, her movements quick and practiced, like she'd been cleaning up other people's messes her whole life. Caleb watched her for a moment, then turned back to the locket, his thumb tracing the hawk's outline. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside, something quieter was stirring a debt unpaid, a promise unbroken, and a girl who carried both like a weight she refused to drop. What had Clara sent her into? And why now, after all these years? The fire in the saloon's back room snapped and hissed, throwing shadows across the walls like ghosts that couldn't sit still. Leela swept the floor in steady, deliberate strokes, the broom scraping against the warped boards. She didn't look at Caleb, didn't speak, just worked like she was trying to erase something deeper than dust. The tin box sat untouched on the table, the locket inside it gleaming faintly in the firelight, like it was waiting for permission to tell its story. Caleb sat in the corner, his hands idle for the first time in hours, the leather strap he'd been mending forgotten. He watched her, not with suspicion anymore, but with something else, something that made his chest ache in a way he hadn't felt since the war. You don't have to scrub the place raw, he said finally, his voice softer than he meant it. To be, it's clean enough. Leela didn't stop. Clean enough ain't clean, she replied, her tone flat but firm. Mama always said a job half done is a promise half kept. Caleb leaned back, the chair creaking under his weight. Clara always had a way of making work sound like scripture. Lila's broom paused, just for a second, before she started. Again, harder this time. You knew her well, then, she said, not a question, but a statement, like she was testing the ground before stepping on it. Caleb didn't answer right away. He stood, crossed to the fire, and tossed in a log. Sparks flew up, bright and brief, like memories he couldn't hold onto. Knew her before the world turned her hard, he said at last. Before it turned me hard, too. Leela stopped sweeping. She leaned the broom against the wall and turned to face him, her gray eyes catching the firelight like storm clouds lit by lightning. She ain't hard, she said. She's just tired. Tired of running, tired of hiding. That's why she sent me. Caleb's jaw tightened. He wanted to ask why Clara hadn't come herself, why she'd sent a kid into a storm with nothing but a locket and a name. But he didn't. Instead, he pointed to a kettle on the stove. Coffee's hot. Take some. You're shaking. I ain't cold, Leela said, but her hands betrayed her, trembling as she tucked them into her coat. She hesitated, then poured a cup, holding it close to her chest without drinking. The steam curled around her face, softening the sharp edges of her cheekbones. For a moment, she looked younger, like the kid she should have been. They sat in silence, the kind that wasn't empty but heavy, filled with things neither knew how to say. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the saloon shutters. The storm hadn't let up, and it didn't seem like it planned to. Lila's eyes drifted to the locket on the table. You ever miss him? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Your brother. Caleb's fingers twitched, like he wanted to reach for the locket but didn't trust himself to touch it. Every damn day, he said. Eli was the better man, always was. Thought he could outrun his debts. Though, thought he could outrun the world. Got him killed. Lila's lips parted, like she wanted to say something, but she closed them again. Instead, she reached into her coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper, worn and creased, like it had been carried through hell. She slid it across the table. Mama said to give you this, too, after you trusted me. Caleb unfolded it slowly. It was a letter, the ink faded but legible, written in Clara's careful hand. Caleb, if you're reading this, I'm sorry. I never meant to drag you back into this. Eli made me promise to find you if things went wrong. They've gone wrong. I can't keep her safe anymore. She's yours now, if you'll have her. The words stopped there, like Clara had run out of courage or time. He looked up at Leela, who was staring at the floor, her hands knotted together. What's she running from? He asked, his voice low, like he was afraid of the answer. Men who don't forget, Leela said. Men who think they own her. And me. She didn't look up, but her voice cracked on the last word, like it cost her something to say it. Caleb folded the letter and tucked it into his pocket. He didn't know what to do with the weight of it, the way it settled in his chest like a stone. "You're safe here," he said, the words sounding hollow even to him. "They'd have to get through me first." Lila's eyes flicked up, sharp and searching. "Why would you do that? You don't even know me." He didn't answer right away. Instead, he stood and walked to a shelf in the corner, pulling down a small wooden box. Inside was a single photograph, yellowed and curling at the edges. It showed two men, younger versions of Caleb and Eli, standing shoulder to shoulder, grinning like they owned the world. Behind them, barely visible, was Clara, her smile soft but guarded. Caleb handed the photo to Leela. "I made a promise. Once, too," he said. "To Eli. To her. I broke it. I ain't breaking another." Leela stared at the photo, her fingers tracing the faces. For the first time, her guard slipped, and something raw flickered across her face. Grief, maybe, or longing for something she'd never had. She handed it back, her voice barely audible. "Mama said you were stubborn. Said you'd fight for what's yours, even if it kills you." Caleb snorted, a sound that was almost a laugh. She wasn't wrong. The fire cracked, and Lila's eyes drifted to it, watching the flames dance. She didn't say anything else, but she didn't need to. The room felt smaller now, not from the walls, but from the weight of what they'd both left unsaid. She picked up the broom again, but her movements were slower, like she was carrying something heavier than before. Later that night, when the saloon had emptied and the storm outside had settled into a low moan, Leela curled up in a corner near the fire, her coat wrapped tight around her. Caleb offered her a blanket, but she shook her head. "I'm fine," she said, but her voice was softer now, less defiant. He didn't push. Instead, he sat across from her, cleaning his revolver by the firelight. The gun was old, a relic from his days as a deputy, but it was still deadly. He didn't look at her, but he could feel her watching, her eyes tracking the way his hands moved. "Steady and sure. You ever shoot one of these?" he asked, not looking up. "Once," she said. "Missed." He nodded, like that was answer enough. "You'll learn, if you stay." She didn't respond, but her silence wasn't refusal. It was consideration, like she was weighing the cost of staying against the cost of running. Before she drifted off, she reached into her pocket and pulled out a small piece of charcoal. On the edge of the table, she sketched a hawk, its wings spread wide, perched on a branch that looked ready to snap. She didn't say why. She didn't need to. Caleb watched her sleep, the locket still in his hand. The saloon was quiet now, but the storm outside hadn't stopped, and neither had the one coming for them. The dawn broke over Bitterroot Valley like a bruise, gray and heavy, the kind of light that made the world feel like it was holding its breath. The storm had eased, leaving behind a brittle crust of snow that crunched underfoot. Inside the saloon, the air was thick with the scent of burnt coffee and old wood. Leela stood by the window, her breath fogging the glass, her fingers tracing the faint outline of a hawk she'd scratched into the frost the night before. She hadn't slept much, and it showed in the shadows under her eyes, but there was a fire in her gaze that hadn't been there when she'd first walked in. Caleb was at the stove, stirring a pot of oats with a wooden spoon, his movements slow but deliberate, like a man who'd learned to measure his actions against the cost of mistakes. He hadn't asked Leela about the letter again, hadn't pushed her to explain what Clara was running from, but the weight of it hung between them, heavy as the revolver he'd cleaned the night before, now resting on the table within arm's reach. "You eat yet?" he asked, not looking up. Leela shook her head, her eyes still fixed on the horizon. "Ain't hungry," she said, but her voice was distracted, like she was listening for something beyond the wind. Caleb set a bowl on the table anyway, the steam curling up like a ghost. "You'll eat," he said. "Starving don't make you stronger." She turned, her lips twitching in something that wasn't quite a smile. "You sound like Mama." But she sat, picking up the spoon and stirring the oats without taking a bite. Her fingers were steady now, but Caleb noticed the way her eyes kept darting to the window. like she was waiting for the world to catch up with her. He sat across from her, his own bowl untouched. "You expecting someone?" he asked, his voice low, probing. Lila's hand froze mid-stir. For a moment, she looked like she might bolt, like a deer caught in a rifle's sight. Then she leaned back, her expression hardening. "Not expecting," she said, "just knowing." Caleb's jaw tightened. He didn't need to ask what she meant. He'd heard the rumors in town, whispers of men riding in from Bozeman. Hard men with long memories and short tempers. Debt collectors, maybe, or worse. The kind who didn't care if you were a woman or a kid. Only that you owed something they meant to take. Before he could press her, the saloon door banged open, and the barkeep, Amos, stuck his head in. His scar gleamed in the dim light, and his eyes were sharp with worry. "Caleb," he said, "you got trouble. Ryder just came through. Big fella, face like a busted anvil. Asking about a girl with a tin box. Didn't sound like he was here to talk." Lila's spoon clattered to the table. She stood, her chair scraping against the floor, and grabbed her coat. "I'll go," she said, her voice flat but urgent. "I ain't bringing this to your door." Caleb was on his feet before she could move. "You're not going anywhere," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. He grabbed the revolver from the table and tucked it into his belt. "Amos, tell him I'm out. Tell him you ain't seen no girl." Amos hesitated, then nodded, disappearing back into the main room. Lila stared at Caleb, her eyes blazing. "You don't get it," she hissed. "These men don't ask twice. They'll burn this place down, and you with it. Then let him try," Caleb said. He stepped closer, his voice dropping. "I told you, Lila, you're safe here. I meant it." For a moment, she looked like she might argue, but something in his eyes stopped her. She nodded once, sharp and reluctant, and sat back down. But her hands stayed clenched, like she was holding onto something she couldn't let go. The day passed. In a tense quiet, Lila took to cleaning the saloon's main room, scrubbing tables and stacking glasses, her movements quick and restless. Caleb stayed close, splitting firewood out back, his eyes scanning the horizon every few swings of the X. The air felt charged, like the moment before a lightning strike. By afternoon, the snow had softened, leaving muddy patches around the saloon's porch. That's when they heard it, the low, steady thump of hoof beats, coming from the east. Caleb dropped the axe and moved to the porch, his hand resting on the revolver. Lila appeared beside him, her scarf pulled tight around her face, the tin box tucked under her arm. "Don't," she whispered. "Just let me talk to them." He didn't answer, just stepped in front of her as two riders came into view. The first was the big man Amos had described, his face scarred and weathered, his coat heavy with dust and snow. The second was younger, leaner, with a smirk that made Caleb's blood run cold. Both carried rifles slung across their saddles, and their horses snorted clouds of steam into the air. "Afternoon," the big man called, his voice carrying a lazy menace. "Heard you got a girl here, one who don't belong." Caleb didn't move. "You heard wrong," he said. "Ain't no one here but me and mine." The younger man laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. "That so? 'Cause I'm looking at her right now." He nodded toward Lila, who stood frozen behind Caleb, her eyes locked on the ground. The big man dismounted, his boots sinking into the mud. "Her mama owes us," he said, "and debts don't disappear just 'cause you run. Hand her over, and we'll call it square." Lila stepped forward before Caleb could stop her. "I'll go," she said, her voice steady but brittle. "But you leave my mama alone, that's the deal." Caleb's hand shot out, grabbing her arm. "Stay put," he growled, low enough for only her to hear. Then louder, to the men, "She ain't going nowhere. You want her, you'll have to take her, and I ain't easy to move." The big man's eyes narrowed, but before he could speak, Lila yanked her arm free. "Stop it," she snapped at Caleb. "This ain't your fight. You don't even know what they want." "I know enough," Caleb said, his voice like iron. He stepped off the porch, his hand hovering over the revolver. "Last chance. Ride out." The younger man's smirk faded. He reached for his rifle, but Caleb was faster. The revolver was out in a flash, the barrel pointed steady at the big man's chest. "Don't," Caleb said, his voice calm but deadly. I've buried better men than you." The air went still, the only sound the creak of the younger man's saddle as he froze. The big man raised his hands, slow and deliberate. "All right, Morrow," he said. "We'll go, for now. But we'll be back, and we won't be asking next time." They turned their horses and rode off, their silhouettes swallowed by the snow-dusted pines. Leela stood trembling, her fists clenched so tight her knuckles were white. "You shouldn't have done that," she whispered. "You don't know what you just started." Caleb holstered the revolver and turned to her. "I know what I'm finishing," he said. "Go inside. We're not done talking." She didn't move right away, her eyes searching his face like she was looking for a lie. Then she nodded, slow and uncertain, and walked back into the saloon. As the door closed behind her, Caleb looked out at the horizon, where the riders had disappeared. He knew they'd be back, and he knew they wouldn't come alone. Inside, Leela sat by the fire, her hands wrapped around the tin box. She didn't look up as Caleb entered. "You're gonna die for this," she said, her voice barely audible. "For me." Caleb sat across from her, the revolver still at his side. "Maybe," he said. "But not today." She looked at him then, and for the first time, there was something in her eyes that wasn't fear or defiance. It was trust, fragile and fleeting, like a spark that could either catch or fade. On the table beside her, the charcoal hawk she'd drawn seemed to watch them both, its wings poised for flight, but its perch still unbroken. The saloon was a fortress of silence that night, the kind that pressed against your chest and made every creak of the floorboards sound like a warning. The fire in the back room had burned low, casting long shadows that danced across the walls. Leela sat by the window, her fingers tracing the hawk she'd scratched into the frost days ago, now half melted and blurred. Her tin box rested in her lap, the locket inside it untouched since she'd shown it to Caleb. She hadn't spoken much since the riders left, but her eyes were restless, darting to the door every time the wind rattled the shutters. Caleb sat at the table, his revolver disassembled, each piece laid out like a surgeon's tools. He cleaned them methodically, his hands steady but his jaw tight. The air between them was thick with unspoken questions, but neither broke the quiet. Outside, the snow had stopped, leaving the Bitterroot Valley bathed in a cold, silver moonlight that made the world look like it was carved from ice. "You should sleep," Caleb said finally, not looking up from the gun. "Tomorrow's gonna be long." Lila's lips twitched, a ghost of a smile. "Sleep's for people who ain't waiting to die," she said, her voice soft but sharp, like a blade wrapped in cotton. He glanced at her then, his eyes catching the moonlight. "You ain't dying, not while I'm here." She didn't answer, just hugged the tin box tighter. The fire popped, and for a moment, it was the only sound in the room. Then, quiet as a whisper, she said, "Mama used to sing to me when I was little. Said it kept the dark away. Ain't worked in years." Caleb's hands paused. He set the revolver down and leaned back, his chair groaning. "What did she sing?" Lila's eyes drifted to the fire, her voice barely audible as she hummed a few notes, soft and haunting, like a lullaby half remembered. "Red River Valley," she said. "Said it was your brother's favorite." Caleb's breath caught. He stood, sudden enough to make the table shake, and walked to the window, staring out at the moonlit snow. "Eli used to hum that damn song every night," he said, his voice rough. "Drove me crazy. Now I'd give anything to hear it again." Leela looked at him, her expression softening. "You miss him more than you let on." He didn't answer, just kept his eyes on the horizon. But his silence was answer enough. Leela stood, crossing to the table, and opened the tin box. She pulled out the locket and set it beside the revolver parts, the hawk engraving glinting like a warning. "Mama said Eli gave her this to keep me safe. Said it was his promise to you both." "What did he promise you, Caleb?" Caleb turned, his face half in shadow. "To protect what mattered," he said. "I failed him once. I ain't failing you." Before Leela could respond, a sharp crack echoed outside, a branch snapping under weight. To deliberate to be the wind. Caleb's hand was on the reassembled revolver in an instant, his body tense as a coiled spring. "Stay here," he growled, moving toward the door. Leela grabbed his arm, her grip surprisingly strong. Don't, she said. It's them. I know it is. Let me go out. I can talk him down. You think they came to talk? Caleb's voice was low, dangerous. He pulled free and stepped onto the porch, the revolver steady in his hand. The moonlight cast long shadows across the snow, and in them, he saw movement, 3 figures, not 2, creeping toward the saloon. The big man from before, the younger one with the smirk, and a third, smaller figure, cloaked and hooded, moving like a ghost. Leela, Caleb called, his voice barely above a whisper. Get the rifle from under the bar. Now, she didn't argue, slipping into the main room and returning with the old Winchester. Her hands steady despite the fear in her eyes. She stood beside him, the rifle raised, her breath shallow but controlled. What do they want? She whispered. You, Caleb said, but they ain't getting you. The big man stepped into the moonlight, his rifle slung casually over his shoulder. Morrow, he called, his voice carrying a mocking edge. You made a mistake yesterday. We don't take kindly to being sent off like dogs. Caleb didn't flinch. You're still breathing, he said. That's more than you deserve. Walk away. The younger man laughed, stepping forward, his pistol glinting in his hand. You think you're some kinda hero, old man? She ain't worth dying for. Her mama already sold her to us, paid her debt with her own kid. Lila's breath hitched, her grip on the rifle tightening. Caleb glanced at her, saw the way her face paled, the way her eyes flickered with something raw, betrayal, maybe, or shame. He's lying, she whispered, but her voice shook like she wasn't sure. The hooded figure stepped forward then, pulling back the cloak to reveal a woman's face, older, weathered, with eyes that mirrored Lila's. Clara. Leela froze, the rifle dipping in her hands. Mama? She whispered, her voice breaking. Clara's expression was unreadable, her lips pressed into a thin line. I'm sorry, Leela, she said, her voice hoarse. I didn't have a choice. The revelation hit like a thunderclap. Clara wasn't running from these men. She'd made a deal, trading Leela to settle her debts. Caleb's hand tightened on the revolver, his mind racing. Clara, the woman he'd once loved, the woman Eli had died for, had betrayed her own daughter. You sold her. Caleb's voice was a growl, barely human. You sent her to me to keep her safe, and you sold her. Clara's eyes flickered with guilt, but she didn't back down. I had to, she said. They'd have killed us both. This way, she lives. Lila's rifle clattered to the porch. She stumbled back, her face crumpling. You lied to me, she whispered. All this time, you lied. The big man laughed, stepping closer. Enough family drama, he said. Hand her over, Morrow, or we burn this place to the ground. Caleb didn't hesitate. He fired, the shot cracking through the night, and the younger man screamed, clutching his shoulder as he fell. The big man dove for cover, returning fire. The bullet splintering the porch rail. Leela dropped to her knees, scrambling for the rifle. But Clara grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the riders. No, Leela screamed, wrenching free. She swung the rifle like a club, catching Clara across the jaw. Clara staggered, blood trickling from her lip, but she didn't fight back. She just stood there, tears streaming down her face. Caleb fired again, pinning the big man behind a stack of crates. Leela, get inside, he shouted, but she didn't move. She stood frozen, staring at her mother, the woman who'd raised her, sung to her, and now betrayed her. The third man, silent until now, raised his rifle, aiming at Caleb, but Leela was faster. She fired the Winchester, the shot wild but close enough to send the man scrambling. Go, she screamed at Clara. I ain't yours to sell. Clara hesitated, then turned and ran, disappearing into the snow. The big man cursed, firing one last shot that grazed Caleb's arm before he and the third man retreated, dragging the wounded younger man with them. The night swallowed them, leaving only the echo of hoof beats and Lila's ragged breathing. Caleb lowered his revolver, blood seeping through his sleeve. He looked at Leela, who stood trembling, the rifle still in her hands. You all right? He asked, his voice rough with pain. She didn't answer, just dropped the rifle and sank to her knees, her hands covering her face. She was supposed to love me, she whispered, her voice breaking. She was supposed to protect me. Caleb knelt beside her, ignoring the blood on his arm. He didn't touch her, just stayed close, his presence solid as the pines. She made her choice. He said, "Now you make yours." Leela looked up, her eyes wet but fierce. "I ain't running." She said, "Not anymore." He nodded, a flicker of pride in his eyes. "Then we fight," he said, "together." The moonlight bathed them in silver, the saloon standing silent behind them, on the porch. The tin box lay forgotten, its locket glinting like a promise that had been broken and remade in the same breath. The saloon stood quiet under a dawn that broke keyboard_arrow_right bled pale and pink across the Bitterroot Valley, the snow glowing soft as the world exhaled. Leela sat on the porch steps, her tin box beside her, the locket now tucked into her pocket like a secret she wasn't ready to face. Her hands were still raw from gripping the rifle the night before, her knuckles bruised from the swing she'd taken at her mother. Caleb stood nearby, his arm bandaged where the bullet had grazed him, his revolver holstered, but close. The air was crisp, the kind of cold that bit at your bones. But neither moved to go inside. They were waiting not for the riders to return, but for the weight of what had happened to settle. Lila's eyes were fixed on the horizon, where the pines stood like sentinels against the sky. "She's gone," she said, her voice hollow, like the wind had stolen half of it. "Mama's gone, and I don't even know who she was anymore." Caleb sat beside her, his weight making the steps creak. He didn't speak right away, just let the silence sit between them, heavy but not unkind. "You don't need to know her to know yourself," he said finally, his voice low, like he was pulling the words from somewhere deep. "You're more than what she made you." Lila's fingers tightened around the locket in her pocket, the hawk's edges pressing into her palm. "I thought she loved me," she said, her voice cracking. "I thought I was enough." Caleb looked at her, his eyes soft but steady. "You are," he said. "You always were." She shook her head, tears welling but not falling. Then why'd she sell me? Why'd she send me to you with a lie? He didn't have an answer for that, not one that would fix the ache in her chest. Instead, he reached into his coat and pulled out the photograph he'd shown her days ago, the one of him, Eli and Clara, young and unbroken. He handed it to her. "This was before the world got its claws in us," he said. "Eli made me promise to look out for Clara. I didn't. I ran instead. But I'm here now, Leela, and I ain't running again." She stared at the photo, her thumb tracing the faint smile on her mother's face. "What if they come back?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Then we fight," Caleb said, "like we did last night. Together." The word together hung in the air, warm and solid, like a fire kindled against the cold. Leela looked at him, her gray eyes searching his face for something she'd never dared to hope for, a place to belong. She nodded, slow and certain, and for the first time, she didn't look away. That afternoon, Caleb took her to the barn behind the saloon, where an old wagon sat, its wood weathered but sturdy. He showed her how to repair a broken axle, his hands guiding hers with a patience that felt like a promise. She listened, her movements clumsy but determined, and when she tightened the last bolt, she stepped back, a flicker of pride in her eyes. "I did it," she said, almost surprised. "You did," Caleb said, a rare grin breaking across his face. "You're a quick study, Leela." She shook her head, a small laugh escaping her. "Unia," she said, the name soft but firm on her lips. "Call me Unia." Caleb's grin faded, replaced by something deeper, pride, maybe, or something closer to love. "Unia," he repeated, like he was tasting the word for the first time. "Suits you." That night, they sat by the fire, the saloon quiet except for the crackle of the flames. Unia pulled out the locket and opened it, revealing a tiny engraving. Inside, a date, 1870, and the initials EM and CW intertwined. "They loved each other once," she said, her voice steady now. "Maybe that's enough." Caleb nodded, his eyes on the fire. "Love don't erase mistakes," he said, "but it can build something new." She looked at him, then reached for the charcoal she'd used to draw the hawk on a scrap of wood. From the barn, she sketched a new image, a hawk, its wings spread wide, soaring over a valley that looked like home. Beneath it, She wrote a single word, Unia. She set it on the mantel, a quiet claim to the name. The place, the life she was choosing. The next morning, Caleb found her outside, standing in the snow, her arms outstretched like she was catching the dawn. "What are you doing?" he called, stepping onto the porch. She turned, her face lit with a smile that felt like spring. "I'm flying," she said. "Just for today." He laughed, a sound that echoed across the valley. And for the first time in years, it didn't hurt. The saloon stood behind them, its walls worn but warm, a home not just for him, but for her. The riders might come back, but Unia wasn't running anymore. She'd found her perch, and Caleb would stand beside her, rifle ready, heart open. In the late 19th century, the Bitterroot Valley was a frontier of hope and hardship where settlers, outlaws, and dreamers carved out lives against a brutal landscape. Women like Clara often faced impossible choices, trading personal sacrifices for survival in a world that offered little mercy. The hawk, a symbol of freedom and vigilance in Native American and Western folklore, often appeared in stories as a guardian spirit. Unia's choice to take her name and stay reflects the resilience of those who found strength in community, even when blood ties failed them. If this story moved you, hit that like button and subscribe to join us for more tales of the Wild West, where courage and heart collide. Tell us in the comments, what would you have done in Unia's shoes, run or stay? We'd love to hear your thoughts.